So welcome back. You're watching African Perspective here on SABC News Channel. Malawi Congress Party, or MCP, says it cannot form a government of national unity with a thief. The party, despite failing to win the 2019 election, has asked President Peter Mutharika, who it says stole the elections, to resign with immediate effect. The MCP says before resigning, Mutharika should set up a national governing council to pave the way for new elections. So to talk more about the latest political events in Malawi's international relations expert, Dr. Charles Sinkala, very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers.
So let's just first start with what's happening, what is latest at the moment, the protests which seem to be getting out of hand. We've seen protesters on the street calling for the head of the Electoral Commission to quit. How reflective are they of the tense political situation there?
Yes, thank you very much, Sapiso. The tension there is actually very dramatic here. You could remember very well that the protests started before even the 21st May, before the elections, because the other opposition political parties like the MCP had cited on irregularities through the processes of, leading to the elections, where they asked for a answer for her to resign because of her being biased in terms of not being independent in the electoral process, And I think, Africa now, I think, is going towards getting tired of politics, of elections, where they only, the rules of the game, they are only sided to others, and others, the rules, they do not apply.
We've seen former President Bakili Muluzi now stepping in, begging the protesters to back off, saying that he's willing to play mediator, but the organizers of the protests are refusing. How likely is a solution to come from a former head of state? As in, would there be trust in him like Bakili Muluzi?
I don't think so. I mean, Bakili Muluzi has been one of the people who's been taking sides in terms of the electoral processes in Malawi. Leading to the elections, they consulted with him. They said, can you advise the country, because these elections are not going to be peaceful. They actually confronted him, all the civil society, but he said he's retired now, he cannot involve himself for so much, But why will he come now to involve himself and try to to ask the civil society and also the coalition, which is spearheading the protest in the country, that you should first suspend the protests until I speak to the president, and the court processes to be there. The chances are very slim, because he cannot mediate. The problem is they do not want even the opposition to be in a pact with the ruling government to form a government of national unity, because they said the current president Peter Mutharika is corrupt and is a thief. They cannot work with him. All they're asking for is fresh elections.
But we've seen the protesters themselves burn down the headquarters of the MCP on Sunday during the protests. Does that mean that there's also lack of trust in the opposition, even though they're challenging the election results in court?
Yes, there is certain factions who are against the MCP, and those who are supporting, the MCP and the activists. So these sections of the protests are different, coming from all sets of angles. They are actually diverting the attention, to the opposition political party, so that it is condemned, so that President Mutharika continues, and the court case, so that it's not looked after.
So let's talk about the court case itself, what the opposition are alleging. Stuffed ballots, they use the use of ink, which they say is not credible for the electoral process. What does the court have to look at before it, just in terms of material evidence of this?
Of course, the evidence in chief from the State Council, will look at the elections processes and how they were conducted. In terms of evidence which has been presented by the plaintiff, was brought up the case before the court, to look into the elections. But, Malawi, like any other part of the African continent, they suffer from the same disease where institutions people and individuals are above institutions. So even though the court processes will go through those processes, the judiciary system, the electoral processes, all those has been captured by individuals. Whatever the process, that's why even the protesters are going to the streets, because they've got no faith in the systems.
So does that mean that, or are you suggesting that the judiciary itself would be biased in how they evaluate whether or not the evidence is strong enough to call for or to even order a rerun?
Of course, because even the first thing leading to the elections, everything was fraud. You know, there's no rules which were said to be, to be compulsory for all the opposition political parties. Joyce Banda at one time was banned from participating in elections, and other political prisoners were arrested, just to protect them, not to contest. So if you look at all those evidences from just the point of view, on face value, you look at that the elections were not free and fair, though the international communities influenced and has influenced the electoral processes there to declare them free and fair. Because
which is what I wanted to bring up, not just only the international community, the regional bodies have also declared that election free and fair.
Yes, it's unfortunately that the AU, after being formed in 1961, 1963 in Addis Ababa, on the basis of African Organization for African Unity, for that itself had a meaning for the Africans to be moving to one direction, so that they set up all the reforms in terms of electoral processes, governance, the accumulation of wealth and the indigenous processes, so that Africa can, lead the development in the continent. But, that name already, it failed due to the leadership in the AU, and they changed the name to the AU. AU means African Union, It does not mean African unity. The Organization of African Unity was formed based on the unity. So what is happening in Malawi, what is happening in Democratic Republic of Congo, what is happening in Nigeria, what is happening elsewhere, it's not a uniform part, of the electoral processes or what the AU was formed based on the ideas and ideology of those forefathers who sat there into that state.
Now, I want to look at the election results, and pardon what may appear a banal question, but if you're going to rig elections, I'd imagine you'd want to rig them good and proper. Looking at the margin with which President Mutharika's party won those elections, one then begs the question, was there no outright majority? Why was there not overwhelming support for the president's party?
Of course, that 8.6%, it's actually a disgrace, on a population like Malawi, you expect at least a good margin, that's why I was saying, hence that, the way they conducted the elections, some of them, they even stayed home, they boycotted the elections, including the ones in the political party, because President Peter Mutharika has been flagged as somebody who's corrupt and is not building the country. So all those, the courts, I think they might put them into consideration. But like I said, this lies through the institution being managed by individuals who are above the institution. So whatever they will present, they will say, I've been elected as a president. Whoever wants to be president must wait for 5 years. And nobody will have to, to intervene onto that. Even we're talking about the international community, they won't have even a say.
But they are forced to rule by coalition at this point.
They are not forced, it's up to the president. I mean, he's got 40, 50 seats in parliament, which he cannot even run the government, but he's still saying he's got a majority vote. The elections should have been considered and, said, let's go for the rerun to allow everybody to participate. Politics now have been changed from building the nation to, supporting individuals who does not even care how the country is running or going. I mean, a government of national unity, like what happened here in South Africa at one point, was an ideology from different sectors and pact of political parties to work towards something and through that transition. But now these two people, the opposition political party and the incumbent president at the moment, they can't even sit together because they don't trust each other.
Which is what I was going to ask. It's surely going to be very difficult for the president to govern, given the circumstances. The NCP already calling him a thief, saying that he should set up a transitional council of sorts, so that there is a rerun of elections. With the UTM and MCP against any sort of coalition, what then is the best way to govern going forward?
Yeah, I think he must concede to the core by opposition political party and the civil society, as well as some of the international community, that, you know, these elections won't take you anywhere. You know, if you mean or think that you won the elections, set up a transition government, you know, where it will just be like a caretaker president until they do another elections in 90 days. You know, from there, then he can, you know, in Kenya it happened, you know, even though we have, other places where there's problems in Africa, some other places, you know, they are showing democratic processes where they had to go for the rerun, you know. And if you see how the relationship between President Kenyatta and Odinga, you know, it's more cordial, and they are working towards building the nation, you know, even not diverting from Malawi, but we've seen the finance minister was arrested, and warrant of arrest was issued and is arrested. You know, we need to see that Africa is tackling problems. You know, those who are in position of influence, in high influence, should face those courts so that the cleanup of reforms in the countries can be take precedence.
All right, so let's go then back to the situation in Malawi. There are those who've warned that the continuing protests will only lead to anarchy, given the levels of violence that we've seen. What are your thoughts on it? Should they continue to pressure the government into a rerun of the elections? Yeah,
I think now the power lies in the people, the citizens, because when the institutions gets paralyzed, I think the people, they hold most of the vote. These, you know, protests will lead to the government being, you know, succumb to that situation where the president will have no way. Wherever you go in parliament, he can't lead parliament because of the majority are not allowing him to govern. You know, he has to concede for a rerun.
And these are also anti-answer protests for Jane Answer to step down from the MEC, the Malawi Electoral Commission. Should she stay or should she go?
No, she has to step down. I mean, there's been calls before the elections, you know, and I think if president wants to gain or regain his credibility, you know, he must first start from the Electoral Commission to, you know, either suspend or fire the electoral chief. But if he does that... Is she
personally responsible, or is it the architecture?
You know, it's a complete system. You know, it's always an idea for corrupt leaders, you know, to manipulate the electoral system. It's either they give the materials of the elections late, or they don't give at all. So they incapacitate the Independent Electoral Commission not to perform their duties productively. And at the end of the day, this happens everywhere. You know, we've seen, though they want to complain, sometimes they don't come out in open to complain that they've been incapacitated by the sitting government, you know. And not only that, the electoral Jane had been allowing the government to use machinery to do the campaigns and to do all sorts of things which are against actually the electoral code of conduct.
So are you suggesting a stronger leader would have pushed back?
Of course. But also a risk. Once he takes that step to fire her, then they'll say, this is what we are talking about. So all of these things was complicated. So he's actually in a very bad corner. For whatever stance will take, everything will point to him. You know, but looking at 38.6% of the vote, you know, that's supposed to take eyebrows, you know, very high, you know, for somebody to win a presidential elections in such a manner.
What do you predict will happen over the next few weeks?
I think the protest will intensify, and more looting of government buildings, you know, and, you know, maybe, I don't wish it to happen, maybe we might hear some lives being lost because, you know, people are actually tired, are fed up of governments, you know, taking into taking their advantages of the people. And I think people now are rising up, you know. Africa has been peaceful post 1960, after the independence, most of them. Okay. But now we've seen now a drive of young people coming out to be part and parcel of governance.
Dr. Charles Sinkala, thank you very much for your time and insights. International relations expert, Dr. Charles Sinkala. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Do join us again next week, Wednesday, when we tackle Zimbabwe's energy crisis. From all of us here in Studio 11, good night.